Salut, bonjour et bonsoir. My name's Victoria, and from time to time I'm gonna want to have these honest talks, and today I really want to talk about a third culture kid, what that means. Usually when I see people talking about third culture kids, I hear about all the positives and I don't hear about the negatives as much, so I just want to talk about everything that's good about it, everything that might not be as good, and the challenges. So my hope with that is to provide context, but also if there's any other TCKs out there, maybe that'll make you feel seen. And if there's any TCK parents out here, maybe it'll help with raising children and making sure they're feeling comfortable through this journey in life. So what is a third culture kid? A third culture kid is a person who has lived part of their childhood outside of their parents' cultures. You might hear people also calling them global nomads or also military brat. I don't love the term military brat, but some of them are also third culture kids. And now the term third culture kid, it's a term that was coined by the sociologist and anthropologist Dr. Ruth Hill Useem in the 1950s. In the 1950s, after World War II, in a world where people were moving more and more and globalization was a big thing, that's when we saw the emergence of third culture kids and kids that were moving and living in a ton of different parts of the world compared to where their parents were from. Now, technically, a third culture kid could totally be like a person who, let's say, moved to Sweden from American parents. Technically, if they moved during their childhood there, they would be considered a third culture kid. But the term is used more so for children who tend to move more than that, who are moving from country to country to country through their childhoods. For context, I am a third culture kid. I have an American dad and a French mom, and I've moved around quite a bit. What are the different careers that will have people grow up as third culture kids? There's the military, although a lot of the military, at least the American military, it's a lot of moving within the United States, and then there are certain parts of the military where it's more like around the world. I definitely had military friends growing up who were growing up on like French bases and stuff like that. Then you could also be like a missionary, it could be like a religious type of moving around. And then something that's also very common, which is kind of where I sit, is being it like if your parents are diplomats working for the State Department. There's also a lot of people who are just like their parents are in corporate or they're in commerce. I've met a lot of friends who they have parents in commerce and kind of like is the reason why they're moving to different countries. So yeah, I grew up as a third culture kid and now I'm living in the US, and there's definitely a lot of like feelings and thoughts happening as you're navigating this life. Let's go into all the positives of growing up this way. First off, being able to like move to different cultures and like experience that and see different places, try new foods, learn new languages. It's a huge privilege, and I'll never take away from that. I feel very lucky that I was able to go through that. But definitely first off is being exposed to different languages and learning new languages. I was born bilingual, French and English, and then by living in Mexico and growing up in Mexico, my Spanish got much better. But you take my brother, for example, and he's up to like 5 languages at this point. This man is speaking French, English, Spanish, German fluently, and then now he's adding Hungarian. His Hungarian's pretty good, and now he's adding Greek. He's currently learning Greek. And he just has this like, because when you grow up bilingual and when you grow up around languages like this, it just makes it so much easier for you to learn new languages later in life as well. Because it's just like how your brain starts to be wired and how it works. Something else is going to be like cultural open-mindedness and cultural empathy. So by living in like growing up in other cultures, you really get to see the world in a whole different way. You get to experience cultures that maybe people have not experienced before. It makes you have an understanding of the world that's totally different from someone who might have stayed in one place. Every time you're moving also to another country, you're kind of forced to assimilate. You have to learn what the customs are. And if you're doing it right, you're going to be fully immersed in that culture, which again, it'll give you so many more different points of views. In the end, as an adult, you might be able to understand like different cultures, different politics better, and different laws and stuff just because you were literally immersed in a culture that was so different from yours. I also know that as an adult now, when I am traveling to other countries, I tend to have a little bit less of a culture shock than friends who haven't. Something else about this is that depending on each country that you're moving to, you're really going to develop like a unique perspective of the world, which is so special. Unique perspectives can really make you more sensitive to the world around you and understand better like what's happening, and maybe offer solutions on how to help. Now let's discuss all the negatives or the challenges that come with growing up this way. First off is like really a sensation of rootlessness, growing up without roots. I have a lot of friends who were I find them to be also very lucky, who grew up in a city and kind of like spent their whole childhoods in the same city. So they have all these roots, they know everyone around them, they've always been very close to their families, etc. For me, it's like I didn't get to be around like my grandparents or my cousins a lot growing up. I had to make new friends every time. I had to learn about new cultures every time. So although that has its benefits, it's also really tough on a child having to make new friends and say goodbye to new friends. This also brings us to like moving from country to country. Children especially experience a lot of grief from that. I think even adults experience grief when they've made that decision for themselves. So when children are being put through that, it's not even their choice, but they have to make new friends and they have to learn these things. They experience a lot of grief, but then no one's kind of like telling them how to process that grief, because it's kind of novel, right? Like not a lot of people know how to move through that, which I'm hoping changes, of course. But yeah, I know that like, so most of my life I was in the French system when I was in school. And so we work in trimesters, and every trimester your teacher writes a little comment about you, something like, oh, great grades, chatterbox though needs to get in line. And then for me, I remember one of my first trimesters in middle school, my teachers were saying stuff like, Victoria only talks about the past, she's very nostalgic, she needs to stop. And I remember reading that and feeling very sad and very like misunderstood, right? Because I know that in my mind, I talked about it as in like good memories. I was like, oh, when I did this and when I did that, it was so wonderful, and here I am. And again, I was probably experiencing a lot of grief at the time, and my teachers did not take it well for some reason. And what that did is really like, I got really self-conscious about talking about the past, so I stopped, and which didn't help with any of the feelings being processed. What's been found also on a lot of the research for TCKs is that there's kind of a hard time transitioning to adulthood. So when you look at TCKs when they're children, they're usually way more mature than other kids, because they're learning so much at a very high pace. But once they're 18 and they're kind of forced to go out on their own, people kind of like have a blockage there. I've definitely seen it with some friends that like transitioning to a place where they like have complete control over their lives is hard. And it's also like, okay, I've lived in all these places, where should I go now? What do I do with my life? How will this look like for me? Another thing that you might experience or see people experience is like not knowing the culture that you're supposed to be from very well. Basically, again, if you have parents who are American but you've been living in Sweden your whole life, you'll probably pick up on all the cultural things from Sweden, which means that then your summers when you're coming back to the US, you're having trouble making friends, because all of the things they went through and all the culture that they've gone through, and all, whether it be like pop culture and books, TV shows, all of that, you've missed all of that. You have no clue what they're talking about, even music. So how do you relate to these kids at this point? Like, summers can be really hard for children because they don't know where to place themselves. They're like, I look like you and I kind of sound like you, but we're speaking kind of like different cultural languages here. I remember that I had a friend who was born in France, but very early on moved to Abidjan with her family. When she was about 6 or 7, they moved to Dakar. So really she hasn't experienced France that much, even though her parents are French, but they've mostly lived in Africa. It was so interesting because I remember me talking to her about Louis de Funès, which is a very big French actor from like the 60s. It's like, if you were born in France at that time, everyone knows who that is. He has like some of the hugest movies that are out there. She had literally no clue what I was talking about. She did not know anything about the culture in France, didn't know what people were watching or talking about. However, she had a lot of culture from where she was living. So at the time, like Dakar, Abidjan, etc. All of this encompassed within the challenges basically makes for much higher levels of depression when it comes to third culture kids in their adulthood. A lot of depression and anxiety because, again, yeah, you're going through a lot of grief, you're going through a lot of changes all the time, changes that you're not deciding, which can feel like you don't have any control over your life. Although it has been shown that third culture kids are more likely to get like a bachelor's degree or anything like that, there is also a much bigger part that is depression. And I know that I lost one of my friends, unfortunately, unalived himself because he did not know how to deal with all these feelings. Now, if there's any parents watching, parents who are currently raising TCKs or who are thinking about moving and raising TCKs, I'm really definitely not saying don't do it. I'm saying do it with sensitivity and make sure you understand what your children are going to be going through, because it is something that's quite unparalleled, unless you're an old TCK and you already know how you felt. But I would say make sure you listen to your children. Make sure you help them process that grief. Make sure you are kind to them, because making new friends is not easy in different countries at that. And honestly, another big piece of advice, I'd probably have my kids in therapy at least once a month for like the first year of moving. Someone who's going to help the child process and like who's not going to be a part of their family so that they can kind of speak freely about their thoughts and feelings, and someone who's going to help them build these like coping mechanisms that are healthier coping mechanisms. I wish I had a therapist when I was growing up, which is something that I only was able to get in adulthood, but it's like a lot of the damage has been done by then, so it would be super helpful to have your children go through that. So anyways, I hope this was interesting and you learned a few things. I think it's fun to share like thoughts and feelings with something that might be new to learn. And ciao, à la prochaine. Est-ce qu'on fait comme ça?